Okay, welcome back, guys. Alright, so this video is going to be all about sanding. Now I know there's lots of you out there that like to take the ink off either with a planer or a jointer, and Dad and I have we've kind of covered that before. But I want to go into it a little bit more, and I want to talk all about sanding. Now, back in when we first started doing our videos, which has been like, I don't know, years now, I was using two different sanding belts. These are the little sanders that I really like, the 7510, the little Skills 3x18s. Yeah, 3x18s. I really like these little sanders. I know you guys, a lot of you guys use them too. I have a double sander set up. You don't need to, but I do, because these are only like 50 bucks a piece and they last for a long time. So, but what I really wanted to reiterate, and this is based on a question I got this morning, I think off the YouTube videos. The grits of sanding paper that I use now is this is a 40 grit. Well, it's either 40 or 50, whatever you can find for your initial sand. That will take almost all of your ink off. On the back, I sand cross grain, and I've kind of talked about that. But basically, I sand cross grain for a couple different reasons. Number one, it takes it off that much faster. Number two, it gives kind of a rough texture. So then, when the customer sees that, and they see the difference between the back and the front, which I sand with the grain on the front, it gives it, to me, it gives it that much more finished effect on the front of the sign, so they can see that it does have a finished sand on the front of the sign. So those are the two reasons I really use. I go cross grain with the 40 or the 50 on the back. Okay. Then on the front, I use 80. Okay. Now on the front, again, when I do the front, and I'm gonna demonstrate here in a second. On the front, I use an 80 grit, but I go with the grain on that. You don't want to sand cross grain on the front of your sign. Again, I'll take off, and I'll show you here in a second. I'll take off almost all of the ink with the 80 grit, or excuse me, with the 40 grit, and then the rest of it will be taken off with the 80 grit. And again, I'll show you that. Then I'm also going to show you the little belt cleaner. If you guys haven't got one of these, this actually started about that long, so I use this on a regular basis. So I'm just going to go ahead. Well, anyway, before I do that, there's a couple different reasons that we don't use a jointer or a planer. Back in the old days, we tried it many times, but what we were having is that on outset letters, and I've just got, you guys have seen these before, these were just little samples that we carved. I just went ahead and sprayed them, and I'm going to sand these off. On outset letters, a planer or a jointer may take off the corners or your points on these outset letters, so then your sign is basically ruined. So we just don't let a blade touch the surface of our sign at all, whether it's a jointer or a planer. On inset letters, you may get by with it most of the time, but so that's the main reason that we don't use a jointer or a planer. Now, the other reason is when you're using a board, if it's not perfectly flat and you run it through a planer, it's going to take more ink off of one edge than the other edge, or maybe the center. For instance, this is that cedar fencing. Does that show up all right, Dan? So this is that cedar fencing. You can see it's got a cup to it. Now, when I have a cup to my boards, which on this cedar fencing I do quite often, I will always put the cup in the center of the board rather than that way. Okay, so that my router base can follow that contour. If it was this way, my router base would be catching here, and it wouldn't be as deep in the center. So your base would be hitting out there. So anyway, that's just kind of a side note. So you definitely want your cup. If you have a cup to your board, it doesn't affect the look of your sign at all. The customer won't mind at all. But you want to definitely have the cup this way on your board to your surface. Now, if I was running this through a planer or a jointer, I would have to keep running it through, because it would take off the center of the board and it wouldn't hit those edges at all. Until I got to those edges, I'd have to take a bunch off of that surface in the center before your planer or your jointer would ever hit the edges. On a sander, again, much like the router base, you can follow the contour of that board. And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So those are the two big reasons that we don't use a joiner or a planer. Again, I know a lot of you guys out there are making tons of signs, and you're great with a planer or a joiner. Hey, you know, everybody's got to make their own decisions how they want to do that. I'm just telling you why we don't. So that's where that sits. So now I'm just going to go ahead and do some sanding here and show you another aspect of what I wanted to talk about. So let's just fire this up and sand it off. So again, that's my rough belt. That's my 40 grit. It's either a 40 or 50. Either one works. And you can see I took off most of the ink. There's still a little bit on there. So now I'm going to use my 80 grit and I'll finish it up. Meant to have my air over here. I just forgot to bring it in. See, now on this, because I did this with the profile bit, I've got a lot of high spots. So I would go ahead and touch those up with a little Sharpie, like you guys have seen me do before. I should have taken those out before I sanded it, but I was kind of in a hurry. But anyway, that will look just fine once I touch those up with my little Sharpie pen. So that was that. Now I want to, actually there's my Sharpie right there. I didn't realize I had one here. So I will do this. I don't know if you want to pan down, Dad, so they can see what I'm doing here. I wouldn't want to do this up in the air. Can you get that?
Yeah.
Am I screwing you up there? I'm kind of ad-libbing here, guys. Sorry. So this is, I guess, another little mini suggestion or a mini lesson if you end up with a lot of white spots. I normally don't, but this was one of these letters here when I grabbed this sample that we had done before. These letters were actually cut with a profile bit because that's kind of the way that Dad likes to carve his inset letters. I use more the 60 degree to carve these, and I wouldn't have near as many high spots on there. Alright, so now you can see that those letters look pretty much the same as if they had no high spots in there. That look good, Dad? Okay, good. Alright, so now we've got that board that's got that bend to it, or that cup. So again, I'm going to use my 40 or 50 grit, and in case you guys don't know, I'm going to go ahead and clean this off. I really don't need to, but I'm going to clean it off right now so you guys can see. It's just that simple, cleaning that off. Those are with the belt cleaner. You can get these at Harbor Freight. Or you can actually just type in rubber belt cleaner in Google, and you can find them all over Google too. Okay, so let me get this one. So now, here's another issue with sanding. And I know, guys, that I make this look really easy. And really it is once you get used to using a sander. And I know that there are some of you guys that when you first try this, you end up gouging grooves in your board and all kinds of issues with it. But so the way I kind of learned to do it, and Dad taught me this years and years ago, and that's one of the reasons I make it look so easy, is that I have a very light touch with that sander. I don't try and bear down on it at all unless I really, really have to. But on this stuff, it's really soft, so you don't have to. You're just going to follow the contour of that board and just keep a really, really light touch on it, okay? So I don't know if that was apparent, but you could see my sander was just kind of following that contour and that cup in that board, and I kept a really, really light touch on it. The neat thing about these sanders, one of the things, I don't use it a lot because I'm used to it, but I think it will be good for you guys. When that thing is running, the more pressure you put on here, these lights will light up, and if you put a lot of pressure, it actually goes from green to red. In fact, I'll do it out here and you can see it happen. Can you see that red light on there, Dad?
In order to see green.
This is green, then it goes, well, let me see, maybe I can make it work this way.
Yeah, that shows it.
Yeah. So that was just kind of another ad-lib. So the more pressure you put, it goes orange and then red. So that will help you kind of remember to keep a light touch on that. I can get away with it, guys, because I've been doing it for so long and I know what it's supposed to feel like. So now let me just finish up this and get the rest of those little black spots off there. Now the other thing is that I know you guys, some of you guys are going to say, well, 80 grit, I don't think that's smooth enough for me, and that's fine. You can go ahead and put a put a 120 on there, or heck, a 220 if you want, or you can even at this point you could go with an orbital sander. Once you got the rest of that stuff off of there, you can go with an orbital sander and get, this is as good a finish as I need on my signs. But if you guys want a smoother finish like this, and you want it to look like glass, hey, you can go with a finer grit once you've got all the ink off, or like I say, you can go with an orbital sander. Let's just touch those up. That's pretty good.
Something you haven't touched on yet is keeping a light spray on the ink rather than going too heavy and letting it puddle.
Yeah, that's another issue that we've kind of talked about before. But again, when you're spraying this stuff, just keep a nice light spray on it. And you know, I've told this to a couple guys, and I know you and I talked about it the other day too, Dad, is that remember what we're trying to emulate, guys. I don't know if you remember back way back before they came out with black spray cans, spray ink for sure, but even black spray paint. If you watch sign carvers from decades past, like way back before they had sprays, you know how they got that dark in there? They used a torch. They actually burn it with a torch, and some people still do. Well, if that's the case, you know, when you're torching something like that, of course you can, it's not pitch black, midnight black in the back there. It's going to show through a little bit of wood. So if it shows a little wood through there, it really makes no difference at all, guys. Your customers won't mind. As a matter of fact, many of my customers come back and ask me, you know, so you're going to torch the background, right? So, and well, no, I don't torch. I use a spray ink. So remember that it doesn't have to be pitch midnight black in that background. It can have some wood showing through, and it really makes no difference at all. So keep a light touch with that spray can and don't drench that thing on there. Keep it moving. And again, we've got other videos that kind of showed that. But I'm glad you asked that, Dad, because that's something that I haven't really talked about on video, what we're trying to emulate with that dark back there.
Well, another thing is spraying too heavy clogs your belts up.
Clogs the belts up, exactly. Now another issue that you may have if your belts are clogging up, you guys know again from previous videos that I use sanding sealer, but I only use sanding sealer if I would never use it on this cedar because I don't need to. I use sanding sealer when I'm using select pine because that's where the ink tends to kind of bleed into the grain. Now if you're using sanding sealer, the way I've been doing it is I've been brushing that sanding sealer on. Way back when, again, years and years ago, and just to let you guys know, we evolve. We're changing too. We're trying to improve what we're doing all the time. So I'm still learning like you guys are. I'm still learning too. So anyway, now I've kind of gone back to spraying sanding sealer on because when I was brushing it on, my belts would get clogged up, but it wasn't from the ink, it was from the sanding sealer because it was on so heavy, so thick. So you might go back to using a spray sanding sealer if you can find it. I'm still kind of looking for a source. We used to get Deft spray sanding sealer at Lowe's, but they stopped carrying it and I haven't been able to find it down there. So I'm probably going to order it online. So I'm trying to think if I hit all of the issues with the sanding. So to recap, have a light touch with that sander. Use, again, if you want to emulate kind of what I'm doing, I'm using a 40 grit or 50, whatever you can find, and then I'm going 80 grit. So that will keep your, one thing about using those grits, that's what I wanted to remember, is that your belts won't clog up near as much if you're not using that real fine 120, and if you're not using an 80 to take off most of the ink. If you're using a 40 or 50, it won't clog up on there hardly at all. And your belts will last, gosh, I probably sand 40, 50, 60, 70 signs, depending on how big they are, before I have to change belts. I clean them on a regular basis, just like you guys saw. So I keep them clean, but I don't have to change belts, but you know, once in a great while. So, gosh, I'm trying to think. Is that about all I wanted to hit, wasn't it, Dad?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else to add.
Okay, so anyway, go subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and check out makerwoodsign.com. We've got lots of really cool stuff on there, and we're adding more all the time. So we will see you next week.